Hello, my name is Josiah Clark. I'm an undergraduate at the University of St. Thomas studying environmental studies and economics. And this project is something that was inspired by an interest in land development in the economy of the Western United States. It is still so much of a developing and progressing area, and it's developing into this really cool section of the United States that I think will be important for future land development. What I wanted to look at specifically within these landscapes were the different economies that have existed and continue to progress within the western 11 states. I wanted to analyze the different economic trends that exist, and I also wanted to look at for specific distinctions that exist between the states. Also, I wanted to look at high and low levels of protection that exist in public lands and that are owned by the federal government. From there, I wanted to see if there were any trends of high or low levels of economic activity, specifically levels of economic well-being and hardship, such as net worth, property values, unemployment percentages, etc. Essentially, the question I wanted to ask was, does conservation and protection efforts have more payoffs than just ecological well-being? My inspiration kind of came from a mixture of in-class discussions, as well as this journal article by researcher David Theobald, titled A General Model to Quantify Ecological Integrity for Landscapes Assessment and U.S. Application. His research consisted of classifying different landscapes nationwide into high integrity or low integrity ecosystems. Although the list is long, he broke lands into classes based on how the land was being used, ranging from undeveloped to industrial or 0 to 1. Besides the obvious signs of cities being low integrity, the degree of human modification shown follows many roads around the United States. Another important and noticeable point is how the eastern and western United States are broken in half, essentially, roughly right down the middle of the plains. From a conservationist's perspective, this is good. However, from a business perspective, perhaps one that specializes in extractive industries, this is untapped and potential profit. I wanted to better understand how difficult or easy it is to establish a conservation site so that I could better understand which communities would be able to undertake such a task. I learned much more about the fundamental problems that makes conservation a tricky task, as apparently it is a very complex issue. One of the biggest problems of running a conservation site is obviously having proper management, which relies greatly on funding. And one of the biggest inevitable problems of showing if conservation is effective is how long it takes to see visible results. Due to the years and years and decade-long process that conservation efforts have to last through, it is often times very hard to explain to the public, as well as people with money, why conserving and protecting lands are important. It is also difficult to numerically show qualitative results, similar to the process that researcher David Theobald went through. Because of this, efforts to make conservation happen are subject to budget cuts, making intended goals very hard to obtain. According to European researchers Leon C. Brott and Rudolf de Groot, correct management of ecosystems can bring all sorts of intended and unintended benefits that serves great purpose to humans. The web of benefits of having a healthy ecosystem is reliant on so many complex and intricate aspects. However, the payoff is great, especially economically speaking. Yes, having a beautiful landscape is attractive, but the economic benefits that come along with should be valued equally and be used as motivation. De Groot and Brott noted that the functioning of a healthy ecosystem brings about outdoor recreational activities such as tourism, as well as attraction of businesses and sustainable industries. A high-quality environment attracts consumers who are willing to pay for a high-quality environment. The value that a high-quality environment is priceless and creates immense social. It became no surprise then that the West fared better based off my assumption of looking at Theobald's map of human modification. According to Ray Rasker, head researcher at Headwaters Economics, the West consistently outperformed eastern states in growth and employment. What was the main indicator? Well, the abundance of public lands. However, for a landscape who was primarily relied on extractive industries, how could this be? Rasker lists that this job growth can be attributed to development within the service industry, such as healthcare, real estate, technology, insurance, and finance, and the regression of many manual labor jobs. This is essentially the explanation of the Old West and New West. This newer, highly specialized and high-paying jobs attract young entrepreneurs, college graduates to these cities within the West. Along with it, they bring their expertise and funds, creating a new West economy. However, the Old West jobs still exist in more rural parts of the West and have existed for years but are projecting downward. As briefly mentioned earlier, there is the common thought that federal lands are essentially a goldmine of opportunity and that by just letting them sit there for recreational use and to look beautiful, they are a liability to an industry that could exist. This is exactly what researcher Megan Lawson aimed to look at, and what she found was interesting. Western counties with a large portion of federal lands experience economic benefits in the four categories of population, employment, personal income, and per capita income. The yellow graph represents lands with very low levels of federal land. I believe the results are obvious, however, as federal lands appear to be a major contributor to draw people in. In a place that is rural with short shares of federal land, there would be no immediate reason for consumers to go to these counties. As it is apparent with all the research and journal articles that we have looked at, newer and more innovative industries appear to be trumping older and phased out industries. So although extraction industries in the western United States have been a foundation for the good part of the 20th century, newer and more innovative companies have begun the trek westward. The beautiful presence of natural amenities and recreational activities is very attractive to young college graduates, professionals, as well as businesses. Intuitively and realistically, I believe that this makes sense. As an undergraduate who has hopes to become a member of society and specialize in something, as well as someone who enjoys outdoors, it would be a paradise to work my weekday job, all the while being surrounded by lovely scenery and plenty of recreational activities. Imagine being within an hour's reach of these scenic destinations, as people from all over the United States come to these destinations for various reasons. This brings us to the research question that I focused on, as I aimed to analyze job trends that will be important for years to come and especially pivotal in today's political environment. I also used a mixture of ArcGIS desktop and a research of the Western's jobs industries to inform my analysis. The question I presented was, do landscapes with high levels of protection generate economic value, or do they prevent and halt development in the economy? Along with that, does ecological health contribute to these economic values? This aimed ultimately to analyze the environment versus jobs debate. Here we have David Theobald's Ecological Integrity and Human Development Map, which showcases 0 to 100 varying levels of human development. Roads, cities, and agricultural developments are the most obvious reasons for a causation of human development. Here, I used a layer titled Protected Areas Database, which came from the United States Geological Survey, which looked at areas of public land that have high, moderate, and low levels of protected land. Clearly, the plains in western United States show the highest areas of public lands altogether. Gap 1 corresponds with public and highly protected lands. Some notable areas consist of national parks such as Yellowstone, Shoshone, Death Valley, and many other protected lands. This is what David Theobald would certainly label as high ecological indicators. Gap 2 is a combination of Gap 1, but within slight indicators of human touch. Gaps 3 and 4 corresponds to landscapes that consist of areas with private land that may have experienced various forms of extraction, or another common trend, generally a Native American reservation. As you can observe, gap areas 1 and 4 appears as islands of ranging qualities of preservation. One of the largest islands of low-level protection is found in the Navajo Nation Reservation. As a way to make appearances more simple, I merged groups 1 and 2 together and did the same to groups 3 and 4. As it appears, classes 3 and 4 are a large portion of the western United States. However, this is not to say that these areas are of the lowest levels of protection. As seen on the previous slide, level 4 is where the emphasis of low indicators of ecological value exist. On top of the protected areas database layer, I used zonal statistics as a table to help join Theobald's human modification layer to the PAD layer and county data that was obtained in 2016. Although the Theobald layer is not as recent as the county data, I believe that it still served the purpose of connecting levels of human modification and protected areas, as we can expect areas surrounding Yellowstone National Park, Olympic National Park follow this trend of low levels of human development and higher levels of protected areas. The county data did not account for counties within cities, as this may skew the results, as generally there would be found high levels of income and low levels of protected areas. These cities obviously would not be ideal for setting aside land with hopes to turn into areas of conservation. Here, we can observe states and areas with notable groupings that have high and low percentages of low income. In this case, I inverted the graphics to showcase areas in the western United States that have low percentages of people with low income. By doing this, we can observe areas that have 0 to 1% of people with low income, or otherwise, we could refer to them as relatively prosperous areas. Notable features of this would be cities that have high income, as well as many locations in Wyoming, Washington, and Colorado. The darker shaded areas, generally correspond with areas that have high economic values, such as low unemployment rates, high net worth rates, or percentages. However, I reversed this tool in order to show the complete opposite trend. Areas that have experienced levels 3 and 4 of protected areas and human modification. These areas coincide with landscapes that have experienced lots of extraction and negative land change. I found the repetitive case of Native American reservations to be one of the largest trends. However, the Navajo Nation reservation does not correspond here. One other item that I would like to look into would be the areas surrounding Central California, where California's agriculture industry is primarily based. Although there are many areas that are populated, I think it would be inaccurate to say that the entire section should be identified as cities and not be accounted for. The other few locations that did not follow the Native American trend did, however, follow the results that I would call Old West jobs, such as logging, forestry, mass fishing, mining, and ranching. As opposed to the previous income percentage slide, here is the normal display of areas with high proportions of residences with low income percentages. The graphics are essentially flipped from the previous slide, in this case to show areas that are relatively poor, showing negative economic values. As expected, many of the protected area development level 4 locations, which correspond with activities of extraction, are in correlation with many of the poorest areas. This essentially can kind of give a good idea of Old West areas. A term that I have heard surface in the news is new coal, which is designed to sound like a less harmful and more sustainable form of energy, which is intended to essentially revamp an industry like coal. Here, I looked at a coal production line graph produced by the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy Research. A common trend is that although it may appear that coal is on the rise, the East Coast has been in decline since the 1990s, and the West has approached its decline relatively recently until 2010. The West is shown as the substantial supplier of coal from the mid-1970s and onward, however, does show a downward trend. From the same set of research, note the moderate decline of national employment nationwide in the United States for coal. The West did not enter until the 1980s and has consistently stayed low. The national and eastern employment have stayed relatively equal, both showing signs of decline. The only substantial jump that is noticeable is found near the 1973 oil crisis, where OPEC proclaimed an oil embargo. This would then explain the jump when the United States was more reliant on oil. The explanations for the decline in oil production are pretty simple. Simply, environmental regulations and productivity gains in other forms of efficient energy and overall increases in productivity can be explained by technological advancements. The fracking revolution of natural gas has actually driven down natural gas prices, making coal less competitive in electricity production. So when we look back at counties with the highest levels of economic factors, we see jobs that are consistently New West based. Counties that have performed the best are benefiting from nearby public land in multiple ways, such as supporting commodity sectors like natural gas and timber, as well as increasing tourist and recreational spending and sustaining steady growth by attracting entrepreneurs and retirees. Although natural gas is also a fossil fuel, it carries greater value than the receding industry of coal. Federal lands, then, would clearly pose as an asset to the developing industries of the West. Moving into a current and future outlook, service-based industries are the clear future for the Western economy. There is substantial and expected growth in industries that do not concern Old West jobs, but rather ones that deal with healthcare, real estate, and technology. This means that more college degrees and a specialized workforce will be coming to the Western economy, which will be the recipe for growth. However, it begs the question that, can there be too much growth? Similar to the growth periods found on the East Coast, which would thus cause federal lands to be cut smaller potentially? Looking at the age demographics found on the ArcGIS county data file, the data shows that the mean age is roughly around 43 years old, the maximum and minimum 57 and 23, with the most common age range being ages 40 to 50 years old. 20 years down the line, when the current demographic retires and the new and younger generation moves in, will the amenities found in the federal lands be the cause for future problems? Although it is expected that the most common age range is roughly 40 to 50 years old, obviously because they've had more time to obtain such financial status, if more young people are expected to move to the growing economy, can that be problematic?